Hello and welcome to a very special AutoTalk weekly wrap. I hope you're doing your morning live on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube. Well, no one watches YouTube. It's all LinkedIn and Facebook, mostly LinkedIn. Now, we are live today from the Australian Automotive Dealers Association conference in Brisbane. It's been a busy couple of days up here. We've caught up with a couple of Kiwi dealers, which has been great. We'll see a few more. I think there is a bit shortage of Kiwi numbers here today. I think a bit hard to get some flights, but still a really good conference, particularly today. There's a lot of interest in a evening session or a late afternoon session tonight about used import vehicles on new car lots. That will be controversial. We might touch on that a little bit later. That's what we're up to. Now, a couple of little things. Firstly, Graham, I need to apologise to you. Last week you said Toyota were putting Fielder hybrids onto that social sharing scheme. It looks like you are right. I went back and had a closer look at the material. It looks like at least some of them are imports, so I'll throw that one to you. And the other thing today is just a little bit of a teaser. If you go jump on autotalk.co.nz or evsandbeyond.co.nz at midday today, get on the button at midday, we have some really exciting breaking news that's been embargoed a little. I will say it's a new brand to the New Zealand market. We'll be pretty much the first to have that out there. So do go and check AutoTalk out today. We'll send out some emails about the same time. I'm sure there's a few people guessing as to what's going on there. And we'll have that really interesting news for you. But let's cut to the schedule that Matthew has so graciously put. So let's start with the first news. Now, the AADA conference. Brisbane, we've seen a few interesting discussions over here so far. If you follow AutoTalk, either New Zealand or Australia, you would have seen the talk there about data security yesterday, but a whole pile of other interesting things here. Really great to see an industry being able to get together again after such a long lockdown with COVID. They felt it over here as much as we did. And certainly a few beverages going around. Interesting discussion. The feedback you got so far is perhaps the Australians have slipped a little bit behind New Zealand when it comes to software and digital marketing, which is interesting. I highly encourage dealers to come over to events like this. It is genuinely like the term goes study tour, I think, a lot for going to these things, and I think it's true. You do learn a lot, but also just the catch up with people who suppliers have really good ideas about how you can boost profitability in your dealership. It makes a lot of sense, and we're over here for that. We're also over here just for a little bit of a scoping tour because we want to put together, as we've talked before and had shut down by COVID, something for New Zealand. So we will be looking at what's going on here as to whether we can do something in New Zealand. But also we've got a few ideas around maybe putting together a tour to NADA next year. I think NADA, North American Dealer Association, is the one that people really want. Perhaps we might put out something soon about encouraging some dealers to join us in Dallas for 2023. You reckon you get some clearance to go to Dallas, Graham?
Yeah, it depends on the time of the year, Richard. There's always time to go to Dallas, isn't there?
What do you feel about the relevance and the importance to dealers of that professional development coming to events like this?
So it depends which sector you talk about, and I think traditionally the idea has always been that the new vehicle sector leads the way in terms of new ideas on marketing, new ideas on dealership styles. But I think of recent years, we've seen how the used sector, and that's not just used imports, but just used in general, has kind of been leapfrogging ahead in some areas with some really innovative ideas around dealership styles, marketing, the way they approach their customer base. I think there's actually a lot to learn from both sides. So dare I say it, that there's probably some interest from some of the bigger used dealerships in New Zealand that might actually benefit from this, and some lessons to be learned too. So you'd never say never. And I think sometimes one of the great misgivings I have about our trade is we're so separated between sort of new over here and used over here, and near the twain shall meet. It's kind of like this the whole time. When the truth of it is, actually, we've got a lot of stuff in common. We all sell cars. And I think we sometimes need to sort of get over ourselves a wee bit and get off our high horse and just accept that all these different models, all these different ideas can work whether you're in the used sector or the new. Bring it together and we can actually probably all collectively have a better marketplace as a result. So I'm in support. I think these sort of things should to an extent be part of your calendar.
You'd want to do one of these eventually? You don't
Yes.
drink, which might be a bit of a
Sorry.
downfall to that, I guess.
I need to get clearance from the boss, obviously.
And all three of us
No,
have got one of
no
those
worries at
right
all.
now, right? Maybe it could be storm chasing season, Rich. They could do it in May, perhaps. Just a suggestion. Could be storm chasing season.
Now you touched on it. You touched on it last week briefly, Graham. But does it concern you a little bit that Australia, and when we're having it as a panel discussion at the major of the conference here, is looking more at used imports? I mean, does that worry a little bit about the impact it could have on the New Zealand market?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you're not the first person to say to me, well, hang on a minute, you're involved in an Australian association, which I am. I mean, full transparency here, which is looking at potentially taking some market share away from New Zealand. Well, I don't see it that way. I think that within, by and large, the sectors that New Zealand plays in, the Australian marketplace is looking at something a little bit different. And there should be enough cars within reason to go around both markets. And I think the Australian marketplace has got a long way to go before that becomes an issue anyway. I think that there just needs to be, perhaps, and it'll be really interesting, the session this afternoon you're going to go to, about what sort of sentiment there is amongst the dealers and not the distributors. I know this is a AADA conference, about what the future could hold around stocking of used vehicles to supplement the stock they currently can't get. And we know that the issue about stock is not going to go away in 6 months. It could be a 2-year issue or longer. So what are they going to do? What tools are in the toolbox they're not currently thinking of to allow them inventory to sell?
Mm-hmm. We'll see what that comes of tonight. We'll have some coverage from that event. You can actually still register online to watch the sessions. So I think that one is about 3 o'clock Australian time, so about 5 o'clock New Zealand time. So I believe the address for that is aadaconvention.com.au. So if you do want to watch that panel, and I'm sure there will be a few people doing that, then jump on there today and see if you can't last minute register. More local news. Ute sales have rebounded for May. Used market slower to reboot. After disappearing from New Zealand's registration data in April, used registration figures have partially rebounded in May, with Toyota's Hilux topping the month's table ahead of the Toyota RAV4 and Mitsubishi Outlander. On the flip side, the market reboot is still in progress for the used vehicle market. Its registration figures languished in May, showing little progress on low figures of April and being 39% down year on year. The thing with the new market at the moment, I think it's interesting, we see Hilux at the top, we see Triton, we see various other cars. It's not necessarily what people are selling, it's what people can get on a ship and land into the country. And that's why I think we're seeing such huge months and then very little from certain things. Used is a little more of a concern. I mean, I've heard a few people saying it is starting to chill a little out there, Graham.
Yep, I think you'd be bang on there. It's a bit of a chilly wind blowing on through, and I think just looking at what's going on in Japan right now with the pricing, for example, on the stock that would attract a fee coming now into New Zealand, the prices of those have all come back quite sharply. It's because nobody's buying them. And I think we still have quite a big stockpile here in New Zealand of the bigger fee attracting stuff, which goes back to the point that I raised, I think, one of our very first live sessions we had here, which was the clean car standard, the clean car rebate program was kind of almost coming at the wrong time, where all the work that was supposed to do was being done for it by the price of petrol. And so buyers just haven't returned to that sector. And if you're a dealer right now sitting on a whole lot of things like CRVs and Vanguards and Outbacks and all the stuff we traditionally like to have a lot of, I think right now you're in real trouble, because that market is just not there. It's not that the prices have dropped, there's just not buyers for it. And so I think that marketplace, you're seeing a drop in registrations, part because of the lack of that market being there in the first place. And I think also there is definitely sentiment among buyers right now that it may not be necessarily a great time to be spending discretionary money as opposed to need a car money.
Do you think the threat of mortgage rates going up has certainly kicked people out of the market a little bit?
Yeah, well, it's like a media narrative, isn't it? So if you're bombarded just night after night after night on the news about mortgage rates, the possibility of a recession, about all these different things, the average person, dare I say it, is going to sit there in their lounge room at 6 o'clock watching the news thinking, maybe we shouldn't buy that new car. Maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Because people are, I think anyway, people are very much a product of the media today that they see. And the media is telling them there's bad times brown coming, then they're going to back out with the checkbook. And I think we're seeing that.
Mm-hmm. Now, Two Cheap Cars have reported not the best financial result for the last financial year. New Zealand Automotive Investments Limited, the parent company of Cheap Cars, has acknowledged some challenges that they faced in the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. The group reported revenue and income of 66 million and net profit after tax of 2.6 million. Although neither of these figures represent an outright loss, both were down on 2021 by $100,000 and $600,000 respectively. It was a big week of financial reports in the industry, with the likes of Colonial Motor Company, Main Freight, and Geneva Finance all reporting big profits. Now, on Two Cheap, have they given indication in their reports, Matthew, about what's gone wrong there? Not that there's really much going wrong. I mean, surely that kind of result's not too bad.
Yeah, I mean, we've also seen a few reports from a few other brands who've suffered worse. But I mean, the list that they provided was more of the same of the things that we've seen. COVID-19. They list the CCCFA, the lending laws, as being a big part of the decline. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a bit of a victory, but also, I mean, we talked a little bit about this last week. I think Two Cheap obviously spends quite a lot of money on marketing. They're a bit of a juggernaut here. It makes sense that they've had a reasonable year relative to maybe some of the smaller brands.
I actually think it's interesting to see Two Cheap's figures these days. We never really had access to a used import dealer group before. Though that turnover, well, substantial. That's not massive. That's probably a small to medium new vehicle group. They've certainly got some growth, I think, that they've got to do to match up to the stock market expectations. And I believe the share price still hasn't done anything fantastic since it's listed. Though, of course, that did give the owners a bit of liquidity to be able to move around a little bit. And it has brought in experience. I think that the listing and the subsequent actions, even though they have had still a little bit of shifting in management, have really stabilised Two Cheap Cars from what it was. Is that the vibe you get out from the used market, Graham?
Yeah, I'll put a different little spin on it. I think that the listing probably occurred at the peak of Two Cheap Cars operations. There was certainly at that point, they're in the media, there was the growth phase, there was the talk of the 10% of the marketplace and all those different things. And the listing actually did come at the top of the mountain. So from there, given how our used marketplace works around New Zealand, it was kind of difficult to improve on that, particularly if you're an investor, because what you're always looking for is growth. And I think the share listing probably came at that peak of the growth as opposed to the start of a growth phase, without a complete revolution within the marketplace to gain them additional market share to build the value back into that share price. What more can I say? It's interesting times of the industry. Everyone's had to change and adapt. I think some have changed and adapted better than others. I think Two Cheap have probably done well to keep the position that they are. Look at the profitability. But that triple CFA, that has been really hard on a number of dealerships that focus on that lower income lending model. It has made it an absolute nightmare for them. And I think you're seeing that is reflected in those figures.
Now, Toyota New Zealand green market leader. Toyota New Zealand Chief Executive Neeraj Lala says he wants the brand to be a market leader, not only in terms of sales volume, but also in terms of emissions reduction and mobility. May saw the brand overtake Mitsubishi Motors New Zealand to reclaim the lead in terms of sales volumes. But as I said before, whatever comes on the boat, let's face it. And then you're at the moment. Neeraj, our responsibility as market leader extends beyond selling cars to extends to sustainability, meeting the mobility needs of Kiwis to help them move freely and contributing to the communities we operate in. We're not complacent on our bid for market leadership for a 35th consecutive year as we start to see our vehicle production return amidst global supply chain disruption. So this is an interesting one. I mean, we've got to look at this in two ways, in that you've got Toyota genuinely trying to do some really cool things around sustainability in New Zealand. We're seeing their various hydrogen projects around the place. They're now selling hydrogen fuel cells into various projects. You're seeing them getting involved in things like the social leasing scheme. and so on and so forth. But at the same time, this is probably the first time in a very long time they have a threat of losing that very heavily guarded leadership of the market. Are they framing it early? It's interesting, this release came out at the same time when Mitsubishi Motors New Zealand Chief Operating Officer Dan Cook went on a real media blitz across multiple publications and outlets discussing their big year and how they're going and what their intention is, which is to lead the market this year. So good on Toyota for doing what they're doing. It's an interesting time for them to be saying this kind of thing. And especially, Matthew, they've dealt with green efforts. Tell us about that.
But before we kick on, I think I probably need to correct my own notes just a little bit. I noted in the notes that you've just read that Mitsubishi, that Toyota just passed them, but they actually haven't. Toyota's still 2% behind. We got corrected numbers overnight from the Motor Industry Association, so it's 17% plays 15% for the year so far in terms of market share. So it's very close. But yeah, I think that part of it. I don't want to be cynical too much of the things that Toyota does for the New Zealand market, because they've spent a lot of money on all sorts of different things over the years, and a lot of those things have been beneficial to all sorts of different areas of the industry. I love motorsport, so I love the Toyota Racing Series as an example. But I think part of it is that they're sort of they're emphasizing controlling what they can control, and they can control local messaging and local investment. They can't necessarily control when the first electric car that they're going to deliver to people, the punters, is going to arrive. And we noted a few weeks ago that the Toyota BZ4X, their first dedicated electric vehicle for this market, is going to be delayed till next year, not instead of late this year. So I think that's part of it. I don't want to be too cynical of it, because a lot of that stuff's really cool. But I think sort of grain of salt stuff when you see these kinds of releases.
If you want to see like evidence of what Toyota's doing in this space, I don't think it's these headline projects, though. I think them getting involved in things like the hydrogen and the social leasing is being amazing, really forward thinking. If you want to look at what they're really doing and what the effect of the clean car standard is that very quietly in the last month or so, they dropped all non-hybrid Corolla models. So this legendary model in the market, New Zealand's favorite car for decades and decades and decades, is now an electrified product only. And that's a really subtle but meaningful move. Whether it'll help them keep the top of the market, I don't know. I think that's going to come down to deliveries and how many cars they get in. Because I do know they have massive order banks, particularly on things like RAV4 hybrid and Highlander hybrid and Hilux and so forth. So I think battle's more going to come production and shipping than who's selling the most cars.
Well, I must say, I smell more hot air than a balloon convention, to be honest. The truth of it is, like, if you look at the battle between Toyota and Mitsubishi going on right now, I mean, this is pretty significant when you think about it. The truth of it is, Mitsubishi, through either exceptionally good management or exceptionally good luck, or a combination of both, the last couple of years have had more cheaper product on the ground than Toyota. Toyota have had supply issues. We know all the way through COVID, they've had real issues, and it's global, because we keep on saying New Zealand's a little pimple at the bottom of the supply chain of the world. We kind of get the sweepings off the production line carpet when they can sort of run for an extra couple of minutes on a Friday night before everyone goes home. Well, let's build New Zealand's cars for a year. And so we're really insignificant. And so for whatever reason, Mitsubishi have been in the right place this year with product that is both accessible in terms of numbers. They've got the stuff on the ground. I mean, look at the Triton, bringing in 5,000 Tritons prior to the clean car, well, in their case, clean car fee scheme. They had the product, and so they could sell the product. If you've got the product, you can sell it right now in the new space. But it was also affordable too, and they've got some really good affordable products. And Toyota have been hamstrung by a combination of not being able to access the product, a pricing point in the product, and let's not forget the Corolla. One of the major drivers behind Corolla sales year after year after year has been rentals. Rental fleets upgrading to the level they did? No. And so one of the great reasons why the Corolla has dropped away is that the rental fleets aren't buying. And so you've got to look behind, I think anyway, you've got to look behind the numbers and the stats and see what's really going on.
The interesting thing about how the business conditions have affected those two companies comes down to the difference in styles that they've gone into. So with Toyota switching to their fixed price model, they went to a very demand-driven model. Orders come in, vehicles come in. Whereas Mitsubishi have had, and I believe they've managed to either bank a bit of cash or get some really strong support from Japan. And bearing in mind, they are one of the biggest international markets for Japan now for Mitsubishi in terms of profitability. They were able to order big. So rather than waiting for demand, they were ordering big on Outlander, ordering big on Triton, big on pretty much everything in their range. They just put in big orders. And that was a risk, but it's a gamble that absolutely.
Yep, exactly.
Surely they can get these cars in any faster than anyone else. It's that someone signed off to say you can arbitrage the cash to order $50 million worth of stock. That's the reality. And that's absolutely paid off for them. Now, our last story for today, interesting one, seeing I'm sitting at Australia at the moment, is that Westpac is going to offer cheaper loans for EVs, but in Australia, not New Zealand. So Westpac has announced it will plans to offer low interest rates to those looking to purchase an electric, plug-in, hybrid or hybrid vehicle in Australia in an effort to increase the uptake of electrified vehicles, but it will not be rolling out the same program in New Zealand. A local spokesperson told AutoTalk that it will not be adopting the scheme because it does not have a designated auto finance division in New Zealand, unlike Australia. This is fair enough. But I think they're missing a bit here because there are brands in New Zealand that are offering discounted finances for EVs. So I believe that UDC, in fact, Cars on the Table, we've financed an EV through UDC under their special, I think it was 4.95 or 5.95% scheme. I believe Branded Financial Services have been doing similar offerings, so through Avanti and others. Looking over to my General Manager Deborah, have we any other brands that you've seen out there doing it? Anyway, if you Google EV finance out there's plenty of offers. So look, we're going to see lots more of these opportunities in the market. I think it's a good way for people to buy market share, particularly in respect that the penetration on EVs for finance is lower than the rest of the market. So I don't think this is necessarily something that's just altruistic in promoting EVs. It's also a good way to get these people actually into the finance run. You, through the dealership there, have picked up any of these cheaper finance on EVs deals, Graham?
Well, honestly, we don't sell EVs. We deal with hybrids. We don't deal with EVs. So, no. In a nutshell, no, Richard, we don't. And the little voice in my head, which always pops up in these shows and says that it'd be quite nice if we had the same extension of financial generosity across the whole of the, let's just say, the rebate attracting sector. If you want to cut to the chase, let's just say that the finance companies looked more favorably on vehicles that attracted a rebate under the CCS as opposed to a fee. But then on the other hand, we're seeing issues right now in the multi-seater market, the $10,000 MPV sector, where if you make it any harder for people to buy those vehicles right now, they're actually going to be in a horse and cart. So, I think let the market do what the market does best. It's actually working just fine right now as it is. New Zealand's buying every single used Leaf it can get out of Japan. It doesn't have a problem selling them. It has a problem getting them.
Interesting little side bit on that, Graham. Have you noticed anything around financing those cars that are getting rebates? Are you seeing those rebates being paid back onto the finance contract early, or are people holding on to that cash?
Yeah, not yet. So I guess if you're one of the few that still has a recourse ledger, I suppose you might be seeing that coming in. If you're on non-recourse and things like that, where you're not necessarily watching your ledger on a daily basis, it might be visible to you. Now, don't forget, the scheme's only been running for a couple of months. And for a lot of people, those rebates have only sort of 3 or 4 weeks hot in the bank account. If that, it might be a little bit too early to see where it goes. But as a finance sell, talking to customers, it's certainly one of the conversations that we've been having is saying, look, you're going to get this check for $1,500, $1,600 or whatever in your bank account. Maybe a good thing to do might be to actually offset it against the loan on this car. But then, the whole Kiwi psyche comes through and the check arrives in the mail, they go, ooh, a new kitchen. Fuel for the boat.
Well, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And look, from that, we better wrap that up here, wrapping up the wrap, because we're 25 odd minutes in. There's still people watching, which is always amazing. And look, we'll be back again next week. I'll still be in Australia, but these guys will be back in New Zealand, where I think it's actually warmer than Australia at the moment. Don't forget to like and subscribe this. Go and, if you haven't already, like the AutoTalk LinkedIn page, because we've actually crossed the threshold now really rapidly off this in the last week, where we can start streaming straight through that page rather than my page. But we want to build that a little more before we do that. And as I said, don't forget to go and check the website at midday for that breaking news that we've got coming through. Can I still call it breaking, Matthew, when it's embargoed? I guess it's breaking.
I've seen people do more for less, so sure.
Like I say, we're in social media times where every news story is breaking. It's like, think of a new line, Richard. Breaking!
Breaking news. We've got a new breaking news ticker.
Yeah,
anyway, thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. Hopefully you could hear me and see me with this slightly dodgy internet and noisy environment. But we will catch you next week, and we'll end, and I'll let Deborah, who's standing behind there, just with a bit of a pan around the room so you can see what it looks like live at AADA. But thanks everyone for joining us.
Happy Friday.